Imagine if you could incorporate the power of story into your brand and move more people in a feel good way to taking action on the great transformation that you have to offer. Well, today I have with me Matthew Dix, the author of Storyworthy, which is how I discovered him with his amazing book, one of 6 bestsellers that he has. And Matthew, I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, so I got probably about a chapter into the book and I immediately emailed my PR team and I said, get him on the show. We need everyone to know this guy because we all know that facts tell, stories sell. And, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, sometimes it can feel intimidating to try and figure out how to be a storyteller. Right. And
Yeah.
so maybe you can give us a little bit of how I read the book, but they maybe haven't read the book yet, how you ventured into the world of storytelling. I know you have a crazy story about the competitions and everything that you did. It's wild. But why don't you give everybody just a little bit of backstory on how you even got into this work? And then maybe today we can help them with how they could start to incorporate story into their brand.
Yeah, sure. I started telling stories, just for personal pleasure, I guess. Like, my friends told me to go to New York City and compete in these storytelling competitions called The Moth.
Yeah.
And they said I've had the worst life of anyone they know, which is a rotten thing to say to your friend and not true. But I've had a life of sort of, crazy misfortune at times, let's say.
Yeah.
So my plan was to literally go to New York City, stand on a stage, tell one story, check that box off, and be done with it forever. In the evening we went, my wife and I went to the New Eurekins Poets Cafe, which is sort of a very famous venue in New York. And when I arrived, I put my name in the hat. They draw 10 names out of the hat. And as soon as I put my name in, I prayed they would not pull mine. I looked around. It was a bunch of New York hipsters with man buns and side eye. And I didn't want to be judged. I was like, what am I doing here? And I got through 9 names that evening without my name being pulled. And then the 10th name happened to be mine. And so at first I didn't move. I just sat still because it occurred to me no one knows me in this room. So if I just stay quiet, they'll pull another name. But then my wife kicked me under the table and she said, that's your name. And I said, I know what my name is. I don't want to do this anymore. And she said, you planned it. We came here. We got tickets. Your name has been called. Get your ass on stage and tell a story. So I did. And the moment I began speaking into the microphone, I knew I had found something that I loved. And because I'm a competitive jerk, I won my first story slam and it was sort of hooked. And I thought for most of my life at that point, I would tell stories, first in New
Mhm.
York and then over in Boston and then eventually around the world, just sort of telling funny, tear-jerking stories to audiences of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. And I thought, this is great. This is what I'll do in addition to, writing books and being a school teacher and a wedding DJ and all the other things that I was doing. And then one day a business person came along and said, I'd like you to teach me to tell stories in the same way I just watched you do that on the stage. And I said, I don't do that. I just tell stories to entertain people. I don't know what to do in business. And to his credit, his name's Boris. He said, you do, you just don't know it. And I thought he was crazy, but after I took a meeting with him, I quickly realized how I could help him. And so that began a journey of helping business owner here in Connecticut, CEO of a big corporation. And that led me into sort of the world of business and corporate storytelling. So today I work with Google and Amazon and Salesforce and the FBI and every company you could probably imagine has sort of come across my path at some point, and I've done some work with them. So it's been great and unexpected and completely fortuitous, not planned in any way.
And so your friends were wrong. You don't have the worst life.
Right. There was a
You could have
time in
been.
my life,
Yes.
there was a time when I was homeless and I was arrested and jailed for a crime I didn't commit. I was the victim of a really violent crime. I've died twice and had to be brought back to life both times via CPR. So I've had moments. They were not wrong that like I've had these moments in my life that
Yeah.
might have been worth telling stories about. But what I've discovered
Yeah.
over the course of my storytelling career is those stories are not the best stories to tell. Those are the hardest stories to tell. I've never actually told the story of my trial. I was on trial for a crime I didn't commit. I've never spoken about it on a stage. My storytelling friends think I'm crazy for never telling that story, but smaller stories are oftentimes more interesting to audiences because they're easier to relate to and
Mhm.
they create deeper and more meaningful connections with audiences. Unless you were on
Yeah.
trial for a crime you did not commit, it is unlikely that you're going to sit in an audience and think, oh, yeah, I know how that feels. Right. So it's a harder story to tell. So small stories are great and everybody has them.
I'm so happy that you said that because I think that's the number one thing that holds business leaders back from leveraging the power of story in their brands because they feel like their story isn't big enough, it's not wild enough, it's not crazy enough, and that people wouldn't be interested in the story. And I love what you do in the book, and I am taking action on it. By the way, I have my spreadsheet with my homework for life. And so, why don't you share with everyone? That's a great segue into a little bit of kind of what you teach and what you frame up in the book. But why don't you explain to everybody what the homework for life is and what that's all about?
Sure. It came about because I was running out of stories to tell, and I didn't want to be the person who told the same story every time. I always wanted to have a brand new story every time I took a stage. And so I'm an elementary school teacher now for 28 years, so I'm inclined to solve problems through homework. So I assigned myself this homework, maybe a dozen years ago now, which is essentially, it started with at the end of every day, I would sit down and say to myself, what was the most story-worthy moment that took place today, even if it wasn't really story-worthy? The prompt I really give to myself is, if someone kidnapped my family and they wouldn't give them back until I told a story about something that happened over the
Mm,
course of this day, what would the story be? And I would write it down. I don't write the whole thing down because I believe in habits rather than, chores. And
yes.
so rather than journaling it and skipping days, I just created a spreadsheet, a date, and then the B column stretches across the screen. And in that B column, I write down essentially what the moment is. So I only have, 3 to 6 sentences to capture the moment. And the goal
Mhm.
was find one new story per month, maybe 12 per year.
Mhm.
And that would be fantastic. But what I discovered through the process and what, thousands of people have discovered along with me is that our lives are filled with stories that either go unrecognized because we're not looking for them properly, or when they are recognized, we see them and then quickly we forget them and we move on.
Yeah.
And that's how most people live their lives. They live their lives throwing away what is really their most precious commodity, which is their memories. And so you know, the best example that I give to people is I hear people tell me all the time that time flies. They can't believe how time passes so quickly. And all you have to do is ask someone who's incarcerated if time flies. They'll tell you it does not, right? Instead of time flying, what we do is we just allow it to go forgotten. And so if I was to ask you, how many days do you remember from the year 2018? If you're really good, you might remember 50 days from 2018. That's a really good memory, which means you've taken 365 days and shortened that year to 50 days. So, of course, it feels like it flew by. It didn't really fly by because you lived 365 days and every day has something worth living for, presumably, and I believe
Mhm.
it does. You just didn't allow yourself to remember them. So people who do homework for life like me, nowadays I find about 7.8 moments per day to record. That's the average number I
Wow.
record on a day, which means time actually truthfully and legitimately goes by very slowly for me because every day is held on to, and just the act
Yeah.
of noticing and recording it really locks it into your memory to a greater degree. And then I can just reflect back on it and sort of relive those moments again and again. So even if you don't want to be a storyteller, you should be doing homework for life because every day is worth holding on to.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I was actually doing homeschool with my daughter today, and we were filling out this journal that we're working on right now, this Christian journal that we're going through a program together, and it has you do these exercises and all these things. And one of the exercises is writing down like the timeline of your life and like memories in your life. And her and I were joking back and forth because I was saying, do you remember this? Do you remember that? Because whenever we're like having a special moment together, I always say to her, Madison, are you going to remember this when you get older? And what you're saying is so powerful and it's so true because, I mean, you said 50 days a year. I mean, I don't know if I can remember 3 days from 2018, honestly speaking.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're saying is so beautiful because it really allows you to give a moment of attention, gratitude, just acknowledgement to the small things in life that really are the big things in life, like
Yeah.
putting storytelling aside for a second. And I think that's something that can enrich all of our lives, whether you want to use storytelling for your business or not. So I thank you for explaining it in that way, because I think that there's a lot of power and a lot of opportunity for connection, with the people that we love by doing that.
Yeah, I have students who have been doing it for 10 years. They started at the age of 10 and
Ah,
now they're 20. And they're so grateful that they have a memory from at least one memory from
Yes.
every day, from fifth grade all the way, into the middle
Mm,
of college now. So,
yeah.
regardless of how old you are, you should be doing it immediately.
That's amazing. And Madison is 10. So I'm going to tell her about this episode and have her start doing it. So, I think you hit on a lot of important points for business owners, which is that the common story many times is the thing that's more relatable, right? And
Yep.
that sometimes it's in those seemingly inconsequential moments that you actually just document and pay a little bit more attention to that the story unfolds. So I think that's really powerful. But what would you say to the person that's listening today that's like, I don't know how to tell a story? Like I feel like that. Like I don't know how to tell a story. So, what do you think is the simplest framework that you teach to your clients if they're at the very beginning stages and they just want to slowly begin to incorporate this into what they're doing?
Well, the hurdle people have to overcome is sort of understanding what a story is, because most of the
Mm-hmm.
time people aren't telling stories. They're reporting on events in their lives, right?
Yeah.
Chronologically, here are some things
Yeah.
that happened to me. And
Yeah.
that's why we marry people, because those are the only people who are willing to listen to our chronological accounting of our lives. Nobody wants it. A
That's great.
story is essentially about change. It's a moment of either realization, you've recognized something new about yourself, the world, your daughter, your business, or transformation, meaning I've actually changed in some fundamental way as a person. That's what every movie, every book, every play, every television show is about. It's about a protagonist who, at the beginning of a story, is one kind of a person, and at the end of the story is a different kind of person. We are the same way. These same things happen to us on a very regular basis. We shift our thinking, we change our minds, we fall in love, we fall out of love, we love our kid, we want to kill our kid. Like all of these are moments that are worth talking about. So we're looking for moments of meaning, and they're often reflected through the vehicle of change. And when we find those moments, then we can become storytellers. And even if you're a bad storyteller, meaning you don't have any craft supporting what's coming out of your mouth, you're at least telling a story now and not just sort of recounting
Yeah.
events, which will always bore people. A poorly told story is still a story, and that's much
Yeah.
better than what most people are doing today.
Yeah. So, what would you say are like point one, two, and three for someone that's listening today? So I love what you said. So, you said it was either a realization or a transformation, right?
Yep.
It's like some kind of shift that you had. What would
Right.
you say when you think about maybe yourself and the stories that you've told that resonate the most with people, or maybe your students when they go out and start telling stories? What are some of the other components that really make that experience a compelling one that interests and captivates people?
So what I tell people is you always have to start at the end of your story so that you know where you're
Mm,
aiming at. You got to the landing place. You got to know
ah,
what the moment is that you're essentially speaking to.
okay.
So for example, yesterday in the car, my son Charlie, who is now 12, he got in the car and he said, "Dad, I got a lot of compliments on my sweatshirt today." It's the first time in his entire life he has ever spoken to me about clothing or demonstrated any concern or awareness about his clothing. And I was in the front seat and he was in the back seat, and I had a moment. It was a moment where I recognized, oh, he is now aware that people are looking at him. And I think he's going to become more aware about his clothing as a result. And it was true, because at the end of the night, he walked in my room and he said, I planned my outfit for tomorrow, which he has never done in his life. So essentially, he wore a sweatshirt, a new
Um,
sweatshirt to school. Some people acknowledged that it looked good. And now he's decided I should look good every day. As a father, I actually was sort of deeply concerned. It was a moment where I saw my son changing in a way that most kids change, but it wasn't a way that I changed as a kid. I was always a
mhm,
contrarian as a kid. And so while my
mhm.
friends were trying to look good, I essentially made fun of them for caring about how they
Yeah.
look. And to this day, I still remain the same. I
Yeah.
kind of don't often care, and often catch grief for the way that I dress in professional settings, at weddings, and things like that, because I just don't give a damn. So
Mhm.
that was a moment, right? So I have to ask myself, where am I trying to land? That's the end of the story. And the end of the story for me is it's a recognition that my son is following a path that I did not admire as a kid myself. He's sort of
Mm-hmm.
becoming the kid that I didn't like when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it
Mm-hmm.
made me a little
Mm-hmm.
sad. That's the end of the story, right? And so then to find the beginning of the story, I have to ask myself, what's the opposite of the ending? Right. So if at the end of the story, I'm a little disappointed in my son or a little disappointed that he's following a path I didn't respect as a kid, the beginning of my story should probably be something to the effect of, I deeply respect my son for decisions that he's making, or he doesn't care about what people think and it's amazing and I love it because he's so much like me. And then I discover, oh, he's not as like me as I had hoped. Right. And now we
Mm-hmm.
have a story to tell. Right. Because I'm going to go from a
Yeah.
place of admiring him for his contrariness, which he still has in a lot of ways, but apparently it's not going to be the case when it comes to what he wears, at least at the current moment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's powerful. Thank you
But
for
if you get the
sharing
beginning and the end that are in conversation with each other like that, essentially in opposition to each other, now you've done what most people don't do, which
that.
is they
Mm-hmm.
actually have a plan for where they're trying to end and they'll choose a sensible location to begin that speaks to the ending. If you just do that, you're better than most people in the world, even if you don't have any other craft behind it.
Yeah. Okay. Super powerful. That's a very interesting. I love how you explained that. That's super interesting. So, what else do you think is important for people, particularly in a leadership role, to consider when they're thinking about trying to use the power of story in how they do business, how they lead, how they communicate for their brand?
Well, the best people I work with, let's say, are the ones who understand how they can leverage personal storytelling into their business. So, let me give you an example. I was working with a biotech in Boston, and they sell lots of things, but one of the things they sell is tubes, tubes that are used by other companies in manufacturing and experiments.
Hmm.
And I was working with 5 scientists at this biotech. They were all going to a conference, and the goal was to get some sales leads. And I helped all 5 scientists tell stories as a part of their presentation, which is something they had never done before. But one
Hmm.
scientist, a guy named John, decided all he was going to do was tell a story. He went all in. And so he's doing the talk about these tubes, and essentially his company, they make like 18 different tubes of various sizes and shapes, and they're very expensive compared to the competitors because the competitors only make one tube, and you have to sort of retrofit the competitors tube to your needs. Like it's harder to do, but it's a lot cheaper. So John goes to the conference and he stands on the stage and he talks about grocery shopping on Saturday mornings. He says he hates it because his family is so demanding, and it starts with the apples. He stands in front of that big, table of apples, and his son likes Cosmic Crisp, which is some new apple that's impossible to find. And his daughter likes Yellow Delicious. And his wife seems to need like a different apple every day of the week. So he goes with a Sharpie and he has to like put all these apples in all these different bags and mark them up. And he says it takes me 15 minutes just to get past the apples. But then he tells the audience he does it because he believes his kids and his wife should get what they want, that they deserve to have exactly what they want and need every week. And then he says, our company thinks the same thing. Our competitors say, here's a Macintosh, make it work no matter what you're doing. We think you should get all the apples too. We think you should get exactly what you want for exactly what you're doing, even if it costs a little bit more. And that's all he does. He's a scientist who does not report on science. And when he gets back to the office a week later, and we take a look at the numbers, he has more leads than the other 4 scientists combined. And the marketing
Hmm.
director is really annoyed with me because I've sent a scientist to a science conference and he didn't speak to science at all. She's really annoyed with me for a little bit. But, eventually she recognizes John can still report on all their data now that he has these follow-up calls to make, right? And the thing I had to explain to her that she didn't, or John didn't really understand was we've also done something remarkable in that everyone in that conference, when they go grocery shopping for the next month and they're looking at the apples, they're
Yes.
thinking about John, they're thinking about his company, and they're thinking of it in a positive light. So John becomes a genuine, authentic human being on stage. He's a
Yeah.
father and a husband and a beleaguered shopper who can't stand carrying a Sharpie in his back pocket, but he's a good guy. Like you just love him, right? And then you hear his story and you understand what his company does, understanding that you don't get through data, right? And you can't help but want to do business with that person because ultimately, as great a product as you're selling, people tend to buy or make buying decisions based upon the relationships they have with people more than the actual product. And so if you can really connect with an audience or connect with your employees or connect with your team in a meaningful, personal way, that really can change everything. So, I teach people to do that all the time, to become authentic human beings in the business that they're doing and create stories that talk about what they do without sort of hammering a list of product features and cost and, timelines and all of that other stuff
Yes.
that can come later, but not at
Yeah.
first. Yeah.
And especially now, I know surveys that came out last year. I think it was like 83% of people said they want to work with a person, not a brand, a human, not a company. People, as they see companies going more and more to the automation and the digitize and the AI and all of these things, they actually are voting with their dollars the opposite way. They
Right.
want that human connection. They want that authenticity. And I think the power of story, like you said, it allows you to humanize and connect with people. And then later on, yes, like when you get into a conversation, great, let's see if this is right for you. But I think that a lot of people, especially with online marketing, a lot of the people that listen to the show, they do online marketing, they build their brands online. It's like everything looks and feels exactly the same.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Everything looks and feels exactly the same.
it's the beauty of AI. I kind of love
Oh,
AI because it makes real storytellers shine greater than they've ever shined before.
oh yeah.
You can create a lot of AI content that sounds just like everybody else and is sort of easily detectable as AI content. And then you find
Yes.
people who are actually telling stories and being, connected, authentic, true people. And they're just going to shine so much brighter. So I'm a big fan of all the people in the world wasting their time creating copy through AI so people who know what they're doing can, shine above the rest.
It's wild. And I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I think that, especially for people that are building a brand because they want to be of service and they want to be a change maker in the world, they're not chasing the easy button or the shortcut. They actually want to be of service. I would never use AI for my content because that takes away the whole point of why I'm creating.
Right.
It's to share the human consciousness of the gift God gave me so that I can help people. Right. And I think that's a whole nother conversation. We'll bring you back for that conversation another day, but we're on the same page. And, you see that with storytelling as I see that too, being on camera and live streaming and, creating an environment of service for people in a dynamic setting versus just these like edited pictures and edited videos and everything is just like, again, it's just a sea of nothingness. It's a sea of noise. And so I think the storytelling framework that you teach is going to become so much more essential for brands to be able to stand out and be able to create connection and even get people to want to connect with their brand, to even be willing to engage. So super, super powerful stuff. So let's tell everybody where they can get the book, where they can learn more about the consulting that you're doing. I know you work with a lot of large corporations. You also work with individuals
Yep,
in the company as well.
I
Okay,
do.
great. So let's tell
Yeah,
everybody a little bit about that.
sure. Well, I've written a couple books on storytelling, so they're available wherever you get books. Storyworthy is a book written primarily for storytellers, and sort of the business world found that book, and it wasn't really written for them, but they managed to fit a round peg in a square hole and make it
I was
work.
one of those people.
Yeah. And so a few years later, I wrote Story Sell, which is essentially story worthy for business people to help the marketers and the salespeople and the branding and the CEOs and all
Mhm.
those folks. So
Mhm.
those books are, available wherever you get your books. And there's audio books where I narrate them, so you get to listen to me for hours on end. But if you go to storyworthy.com, that's sort of where all of my storytelling world exists. So you can go there and join a free academy and get lots of free lessons on how to tell stories.
Nice.
I sell courses. You can become a member and sort of have access to everything that I have to offer. But, there's lots and lots of free content there that will help you at least begin to become a better storyteller. And then I'm always available for consulting and coaching. I do workshops with companies. I do keynotes for, corporations and in lots of other places. So I stay busy.
I love it. I love it. It's so valuable, so valuable. And I just love your own story, which everyone can read about in the book. But it's just like, it's so unlikely what God does with us and where he takes us and what his plans are for us. And I know you never imagined that you'd land here, but you're helping so many people in such a unique and powerful way. And it's really, really cool. I was very, excited and moved by the book and, happy to have you on the show today. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, everyone, you can scroll down below the episode now and you can click the link to order your copy of Storyworthy or Story Sell. You can also check out Matthew's website so you can learn more about the coaching and consulting that he does. And remember, some of the great, powerful ways that you can connect and stand out are in elevating your humanness, sharing your humanness, right? Just
I
like we
like
talked
that.
about today. So thanks for being here, Matthew. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the show. If you love the show, tag Matthew on Instagram, tag me on Instagram. Sharing is caring. Pass the good word along, and we'll see you back here soon.